So my intention was to come home, here back to the East Coast, and get some professional theater experience under my belt, and then apply for graduate school. But in reality, I ended up succumbing to what I didn't recognize was the adult version of peer pressure. Thank you. Perfect. So what was the adult version of peer pressure from a screenwriter who I babysat for, but I hardly knew. So I end up moving 2 hours south from Santa Barbara, where I'd been for college, to LA. So I'm in a city that I really don't care for, and I'm pursuing this vein of my career that I'm really not interested in, and I'm working part-time selling maternity clothes on Rodeo Drive. And I actually couldn't even take advantage of the employee discount, which was really important, so that kind of stunk. But anyway, it was soon apparent that I needed an additional part-time job. Money was pretty tight. So I found one, and this one was working at the front desk of a small health club in Century City. Now, this club, to dispel any glamorous ideas about Los Angeles, it had recently been purchased by the Health Club LA, but it was definitely the quirky aunt of the company. It was had this really strange layout, and it was kind of precarious, but somehow in its glaring imperfections, it was oddly comforting. Now, our members were this eclectic mix. So we had attorneys, and we had retirees, and we had most definitely at least one aspiring ninja. We had this, fading from the limelight celebrities, and we also had these old Hollywood types who were now content to just spend the afternoon every day swapping stories, hanging out in the barbershop, and sifting through old copies of Playboy in the barbershop that was just right across from my desk. So there were memorable characters, to be sure. There was John Ritter, who, for the life of me, I could not stop calling Jack. That was his character on Three's Company. There was also Rodney Dangerfield, who could in fact not get any respect, but this apparently was for his very, very poor interpretation of locker room etiquette. And there was this older couple, they were really cute, and they would have these in-depth conversations across the lobby with one another, addressing each other as lover, yes, lover, and I'm standing there in the middle, like, hey, guys. And lastly, and most memorably, before I move on, but the most memorable member was one who, he was much older, retired gentleman, and every day he would come in and he was fascinated by my knack for biblical trivia. That's what I thought. He would quiz me every day until one day he handed me this note. He's looking at me deeply in the eyes, and he watches that I'm reading it, and it reads in all caps, "I want you." But thankfully, there were the other members who would just come in, seamlessly go by, requiring little assistance. And one such gentleman, a man of about 70, who came in every single day without fail, he stopped one day, and with this slight Mediterranean accent, he just asked me about me. So, where was I from? What was I doing here? How are things going? And in reality, things were not going well. I was broke. I was homesick. I missed my family. I could barely afford groceries, despite the fact that my agent was still telling me that I was still 15 pounds overweight. But most of all, I just felt really, really out of place. And the fact is I was. So I'm a Southern born, and then a DC raised. I was still kind of a kid, really. I was 22. And I'm in this strange, fast-paced city with all sorts of rules that I don't understand. I don't even know if I want to understand them. I have no idea where I'm going or what my next step is. So I'm telling him something that's not that. So I give him this doctored and optimistic tale. But I realize very quickly I have failed to fool him, because the very next day he comes in, he stops again, and he slowly begins to slide this $5 bill across the counter. And he has this very kind and humble grin on his face, and he asks, "Have you eaten today?" To which I reply something that's not quite the truth, and then he replies, "Go buy yourself a sandwich." So the first few times this happens, and this was not a tipping job, and understand I'm trapped behind this huge U-shaped counter. Trapped. There's only one exit, and it's over there. So I follow him as far as I can to let him know that this isn't necessary. Truly, I'm fine. But that's not stopping him. So then I decide, okay, I'm just going to use this 5-second window every day to thank him. But then that's not stopping him either. He just keeps going. And so then I decide, well, maybe he just wants to know where the money's going. So I need to tell him, like, what kind of sandwiches I'm getting. So I tell him, hey, you know that that turkey sub that they have? And still, nothing's working. He's gone. Because apparently, he wants absolutely nothing in return, not even a word of gratitude. And I have to tell you, something like that in LA is incredibly odd. It had not been my experience so far, and it meant the world to me. So this continues for about 2 years, and I will break that down. So that is, he's there every day. I'm only there 5 days a week, but that's $5 a day, 5 times a week, about 24 months. That is a lot of sandwiches. But despite this very, very kind and warm act, there's actually very, very little else that's going well for me in LA. And so I decide, finally, to come home. So I come home, and I'm meeting up with my childhood friends, my dearest friends, and reconnecting. We decide to play tourist. So we go to the zoo, and then we go to Georgetown, and then we decide to also visit a museum. And this is a museum that's newly opened that we haven't been to before. This is a museum that would have had tremendous impact on me anyway, but especially so after I enter the final room, which is this indoor amphitheater. And there's this documentary that's playing, and it's comprised of personal interviews, and it's playing on this continuous loop. So I watch it a couple of times, because when he appeared, my quiet and generous friend, whose daily insistence that I go buy myself a sandwich, when he appeared, everything stood still. And then it converged at the same time, because we were at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and the film that we were watching was of survivors of the Nazi concentration camps. And I learned that as a Greek, Italian, Jewish male in his early 20s, he lost his family on near arrival at Auschwitz. And for 9 months, he was forced to serve as one of the Sonderkommando. And if you don't know what that is, I encourage you to look it up, but be prepared, because these were Jewish prisoners who were forced to complete the most unfathomable tasks. And I never knew. All that time, I never knew. And so I was overwhelmed. I'm still overwhelmed. It's 25 years later. And I was overwhelmed, of course, with gratitude, and I was overwhelmed with this pain for him. I was overwhelmed with perspective. I was overwhelmed with really the power of the human spirit, which I had witnessed. And I was also overwhelmed by the privilege, of course, to have known this man, but not only known him, but to have had my life touched so positively by his own, to what began with one generous, and then nourishing, and then hope-inducing, and then now the soul-altering sandwich at a time. Thank you.